Tonight, we are honoring the idea that ideas matter, the idea that ideas have consequences, and we are honoring two people who, through their lives, their professional achievements, and their accomplishments, have done so much to advance our nation's understanding of the Middle East, our nation's interests in the Middle East. I would like first to call upon a man who himself is a scholar-statesman, our nation's permanent representative to the United Nations, former ambassador to Iraq and Afghanistan, a former participant in Washington Institute study groups abroad, a friend of long standing, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad.
Thank you, Rob. I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce former Secretary of State George Shultz. Where is the Secretary? I thank the Washington Institute for honoring one of America's great statesmen. Secretary Shultz is a former ultimate boss of mine at the Department of State. Mr. Secretary, I don't know where you are.
Right there, in the middle, on the left.
Mr. It's great to see you, sir. Between 1986 and 1988, I had the privilege of serving on his policy planning staff and as a special advisor to the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. My role was to advise on policy towards the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan and the Iran-Iraq war. As Rob said, having recently served in Kabul and Baghdad, and as I work daily on issues related to Iran, I am living the adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Secretary Shultz is now at Stanford University. I have a son there studying law, where he is the Thomas W. and Susan B. Ford Distinguished Fellow at Hoover Institution. I remember when he was Secretary of State, he used to tell a story about how the leaders of Stanford tried to entice him to come to the university. They said they would have a chair ready and waiting for him. He replied that after what he had been doing as secretary, he would need a couch, not a chair. Mr. Secretary, I expect that your colleagues have made you comfortable in Palo Alto. More seriously, we are privileged to honor a man who has many great attributes. I want to highlight three that enable him to play a pivotal role. First, Secretary Shultz has a deep understanding and timely recognition of the forces, such as globalization, shaping contemporary history. During the 1980s, we saw the globalization of economic activity through trade, investment, and production that were creating unprecedented opportunities to increase the well-being of the developed and developing worlds through an enhanced international division of labor based on comparative advantage. He resisted calls for protectionism, quite powerful at the time, and helped Deng Xiaoping's China open itself to the world. Also, he saw that in a number of developing countries, the increase in the middle class, the rise of political aspirations and belief in individual rights, and the information revolution were setting the stage for the third wave of democratization. He supported the transition to democracy in the Philippines and throughout Latin America, the forerunners of the color revolutions. Second, Secretary Shultz focuses on big issues and advocates appropriately big ideas, and has the courage to challenge conventional wisdom, and is persistent. Some of his friends have said even stubbornly so. He worked with President Reagan to advance the vision of a world not bound by the suicide pact of mutual assured destruction, and ultimately of a world free of nuclear weapons. At the time, the conventional wisdom was dismissive. However, President Reagan and Secretary Shultz believed in this big idea and pursued it. Their efforts eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons, intermediate-range systems, and shifted the focus of arms control talks to actual reduction of these weapons, setting the stage for the dramatic build-down in US and Russian nuclear forces. President Reagan's advocacy in building defenses against ballistic missiles was part of this effort. This, too, was controversial. I remember a meeting that the Secretary hosted at which he brought together all the previous heads of policy planning. It seemed that all of them used their time to beat up on Ronald Reagan and on the Secretary for the Strategic Defense Initiative. They said it wouldn't work, was heightening tensions, and would backfire. One even said that we had a better chance of teaching a horse to fly than missile defense. Secretary Shultz replied, "You work on getting horses to fly, and I will work on missile defense. Let's see who does better." We should note that our ballistic missile defense system now has an operational capability, while there is still no sign of flying horses. And the Secretary's belief that we can achieve a more secure world without nuclear weapons is not just a thing of the past. Just recently, he co-authored an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, along with Henry Kissinger and other leading foreign policy thinkers, that called for renewed efforts to achieve a nuclear-free world and deal with the emerging nuclear threat, such as the Iranian program. Third, Secretary Shultz understands how the combination of a clear vision and a patient and persistent use of diplomacy can profoundly change the world. As early as in 1979, Secretary Shultz saw how the endgame of the Cold War would unfold. In a speech at Stanford University, he said, and I quote, "The Soviet system is incompetent and cannot survive," end of quote. When President Gorbachev and Foreign Minister Shevardnadze took power in 1985, President Reagan and Secretary Shultz pivoted American policy. They pressed the new Soviet leaders geopolitically while engaging them about the need to change their own system or risk hopelessly falling behind. It was this strategy that encouraged Gorbachev to pursue perestroika, and ultimately that resulted in the end of the Cold War. We continue to benefit from Secretary Shultz's insights into our current challenges and opportunities. He has said recently that the present era is a kind of golden moment in the world that is unparalleled in its promise. As economies all over the world are expanding and poverty is being reduced dramatically in some countries, creating a necessary condition for political openness. The Secretary also said there are forces in the Islamic world who want to bring about changes which can destroy this golden moment. Therefore, the issue of the crisis of the Islamic civilization is an issue for the entire world. The Secretary has been an advocate of the U.S. leading the world in confronting the challenges of extremism and terror. Secretary Shultz is fond of saying that a good statesman is like a good gardener, patiently pulling the weeds that crop up while also tending and encouraging the good plants to flourish. Today, There is much good in the world to encourage, as well as bad elements that need weeding. Mr. Secretary, please join us up here. It's my honor to introduce Secretary Shultz.